be our moderator for today's discussion. As we all know, gun crime rates are continuing to increase, and the need for resolution also rises. And the debate on whether we need more gun control is being discussed across all political platforms. And today we would like to take part, inshallah. What is causing the rates to increase? Who does it impact the most? What kind of legislation will help combat the increase in gun violence? Hopefully with today's discussion, these questions will be answered. And I'll leave the rest to Hadir.
Thank you so much, Albara. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our discussion today. I would like first to introduce our distinguished speakers, starting with Representative Ibrahim Ayyash, who is serving his first term in the Michigan House of Representatives. Ibrahim is the son of Yemeni immigrants, and he grew up in a working class family that raised their children in Hamtramck. He now represents the 4th district, encompassing his hometown of Hamtramck and surrounding parts of... Oh, sorry, Hamtramck. And surrounding... Hamtramck. All right, yeah. Thank you. And surrounding parts of Detroit. I guess I've never been there, so he is advocating for progressive solutions and justice for his community. Next is Dr. Debbie Al-Montasser, who is an internationally recognized award-winning educator, speaker, and authority on cross-cultural understanding. She is an influential community leader and the founder and CEO of Bridging Cultures Group. Dr. Al-Montasser was the founding and former principal of the Khalil Gibran International Academy in Brooklyn, New York, and is a 25-year veteran of the New York City public school system. And finally, we have Mr. Adel Mozeb, who is a software developer and a proud homeowner at the city of Dearborn. Mr. Mozeb was appointed to the Dearborn Public School Boards in April 2019. In the last year and a half, he has advocated for more support to his district and Henry Ford College from legislators. He also continues to be vocal about the importance of social and emotional learning, leading the passing of the anti-bullying resolution by the board and recognizing the month of October as National Bullying Prevention Month. Welcome again, everyone, and happy to see you here. So just a reminder to our audience, if you have any question during our discussion today, please write them in the chat box. Unfortunately, we will not be allowing audience to unmute themselves and ask the questions themselves. So again, if you have any questions, write them in the chat box and we will have our speakers answer them in the last 30 to 25 minutes of the discussion. All right, so back to our speakers. I guess I will start with you, Dr. Debbie. Gun violence in the US it's such a big problem. It has been often described as an epidemic. And I think it has touched, almost every hometown or every town in the US. So, for you as an educator and as, a community leader and perhaps even as a mother, how do you see gun violence impacting communities in the US and especially the Yemeni American community? And, how are people able to cope, not just with the loss, but also, with the looming threat that, gun violence incidents might, happen to anyone, anywhere, or anytime? Go ahead.
Sure, thank you. Well, first, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you so much to the ACJ for inviting me to be a part of this. Really appreciate it. I'm also ecstatic to see some of my amazing colleagues from Michigan. So really delighted. Hadid, this is an ongoing issue that is happening, across the country. And it should be an issue that provides all of us pause and concern as to the rising, incidents with gun violence. One of the biggest issues that, we are seeing, specifically, and I'm going to talk about New York City, is the gun violence that is happening in our streets that is affecting, the Yemeni bodegas, the corner stores, as well as Black and Brown communities in communities that are really high crime rates. So, it's so sad for us in New York. Just this past year, we've had a few, fatal shootings that have happened in stores. We had one shooting that, alhamdulillah, the young man actually pulled through and is alive. But every time that we held a press conference in front of the store, the very community that lived around the store, they were always saying, we need gun control. We need this gun violence to stop. So it's not just the Yemeni bodega or the Yemeni store that is impacted by this, but an entire community is impacted by this, right? In the surrounding area, across the 5 boroughs, in different communities. And then, when we look at nationally, right, we have this huge issue of gun violence taking place. And one of the biggest issues, from a national perspective that, has made this issue a pandemic, right? And I'm going to call gun violence a pandemic is because, we have certain states across the country that permit, the right to carry. And then we have states like New York State that does not permit the right to carry. But we see, guns, coming over the border of New York City, and sadly in the wrong hands, right? In the wrong hands of people that are basically, using them, in a violent way, unfortunately, where we are seeing a lot of gun violence happening. We just had, just 2 weeks ago, there was a shooting of a little girl, who was with her family, and this bullet, it just flew, right? It flew and it hit her and she died. The family was devastated. And I can share with you so many other incidents of this happening, people, innocent people getting shot, who, had nothing to do with the situation, but are, sadly, the ones that are getting hit. And so, I think that one of the biggest things that we need to do is educate the American public as to how this, is affecting so many people. And then in addition to that, finding strategies to help people, right? So, in the cases of, the Yemeni bodegas, right? The Yemeni stores that these incidents have happened, in some cases it was robbery. In some cases it was, a verbal, argument that turned fatal. And so what we're saying to, our bodega owners, our store owners is, you have to de-escalate a situation. When a customer comes in and you see they're already rallied up, you see that they're angry, don't agitate, don't engage them, that they end up doing something violent to you. And, we saw this in 2 incidents back in 2020. The Mohammed Qutaish shooting, fatal shooting, and then Yahya al-Muntasir fatal shooting. Sadly, what happened in both of those cases was that they argued with the individuals. And it ended up being fatal. And so one of the things that YAMA is doing right now, the Yemeni American Merchants Association, is we provided, a de-escalation training a couple of weeks ago, and we are going to be, we've already started rolling out this anti-violence prevention program that is helping, our bodegas, our stores to become fully integrated into these communities and seen as allies, as a member of the community versus being seen as a business, having a transactional relationship where you are just my customer and I'm going to charge you for this and I don't care about you. So we've started doing food giveaways in front of the bodegas where we actually are providing fresh produce, and the store owner is basically giving us a list of, families that rightfully deserve this, and they're coming in to pick it up on a weekly basis. We did a, turkey, giveaway. We did the same thing in front of stores where actually families came and picked up the turkeys. And we also did backpack giveaways back in August, where we were, set up shop right in front of the stores. And we were giving out backpacks to families. And the way that the families have been interacting, or the individuals coming, they're like, thank you so much. We appreciate you. These are our friends. These are our family. And they really care about us. And so what we want to do is create that image of this is a community and we all need to take care of each other. And this is, mashallah, what we are, right now starting to see, from the testimony, from the videos that people are taking, or, our organizers are doing this. So, it's going to take a whole lot more than this, but I'm going to stop here because I want to hear from my colleagues and also be able to engage in Q&A.
Thank you, Dr. Debbie. I just have like a follow-up question on this. So in the face of this problem, what do you think is the role of the community members themselves, and what kind of avenues that they can take to advocate, for reducing gun violence, and where do you see is the role of community leaders, is more specifically, how can they, take action or like mobilize, aside from the, Yemeni American Merchants Association?
Well, one of the most powerful ways is being a part of coalitions, right? There are coalitions that are, against gun violence. And, when the Yemeni American Merchants Association has held their press conferences, we always invite all of these coalition members, interfaith leaders, ministers, rabbis from the very community that was impacted by that shooting. So building solidarity, working with the local leaders within those communities is really, really powerful. When they come and they see the pain and the anguish of the family of the store owner, and then when the family, also sees that this is affecting other people in the community, that's what we need to do. We need to humanize, each other, so that way we can work collectively. So being a part of coalitions, going to, the NYPD or the police precinct, meetings, those happen actually on a monthly basis, building a rapport and a relationship, with the police department in your area. And this is something, inshallah, that we are planning to do, is to actually convene meetings precinct by precinct, for our community members, specifically the stores and the precincts that they're actually in. And then in addition to that, being able to, advocate, right? Like you said, how can they advocate? Well, there are so many avenues, right? And so, some of the advocacy that we're doing right now is making sure that we are able to get more security systems for stores, right? Yama has asked our assembly to give us $2.5 million to provide cameras for stores that are the state of the art, not your rinky dinky camera, but a camera that can actually hear, that can actually zoom in, and be able to capture that data. We are also going to be working closely with the New York mayor who just came in, and other elected officials. In addition to that, also forming relationships with the district attorneys. We have relationships with, all 5 of the district attorneys in New York City. We have a direct communication, speaking about cases, and finding preventative ways that we can work together. But the biggest takeaway that our community needs to understand is being civically engaged. And what does that mean? It means that every store owner, every clerk should be registered to vote. And they should be able to task those individuals that are representing them, their city council members, et cetera, their assembly and their senators, task them and hold them accountable about the very issues that basically are affecting them as residents. And one of them is gun violence, and how do we deal with it?
Yeah, thank you so much. I would like to move to Ibrahim Ayash. We just heard from Dr. Debbie about the devastating impact of gun violence in communities. And so, given the gravity of the problem, how is gun violence being dealt with at the legislature? Are there any new bills to reduce gun violence? And you personally, how do you evaluate the current efforts to address this problem at the legislature?
Yeah, thank you so much, Hadil, and the entire team at the ACJ for putting this together. I think before we sort of get to that conversation, we sort of need to take a step back and ask ourselves, what exactly are we asking for, right? No one is advocating for no guns never, but we also don't want a situation where we have all guns all the time. So the conversation really has to be about how can we move to a society where we have responsible gun ownership. This is a uniquely American problem that does not present itself in any other place in the world. Second to Yemen, the United States has the highest gun ownership per capita in the world. And we are the only country that has repeatedly had this situation, a situation where you have stories like Oxford High School, which are all too common, unfortunately, where you have a student walk in and commit a mass shooting, killing several people with a weapon that can fire rounds, multiple shots per minute or per second. So to be clear, I know many people always ask us, well, are you trying to take away our guns? Are you trying to ensure that we don't have our right for our Second Amendment, so on and so forth? And the answer is no. All we are simply asking is that in the same way that if I want to buy a vehicle, I have to go into a car dealership and present my driver's license that is up to date, to present my insurance, and to present my registration. We are asking for a similar understanding of when you purchase a weapon. I can't tell you how many stories exist here in Michigan around the crisis regarding gun violence, which really is an epidemic. You know, just a couple days ago, I believe in Dearborn, there was a gentleman who went to a gun shop, purchased a weapon, and murdered and committed suicide in the parking lot of the gun shop that he purchased the weapon. This happened within a matter of minutes. So to suggest that we don't have a problem is simply untrue. You know, here in Michigan, my Democratic colleagues and I have introduced multiple pieces of legislation to address these issues that are reasonable. Something that says red flag legislation, that if you have a history of domestic violence, if you had a history of reports that you are abusive, you should not be able to purchase a weapon. That we have legislation that says if you want to buy a weapon, undergoing a background check for your mental health to ensure that you're not someone who suffers from depression, from bipolar disorder, from things of that nature that could result in you committing acts of violence to yourself or to others, that there should be a pause. That certain types of weapons should not be sold in places like Walmart, where you can easily buy a weapon that can kill multiple people. And I'm someone who's hunted before. I'm a proud Midwesterner. I live in Michigan. I've went duck hunting. I've went deer hunting. So I know the importance of having that opportunity for sport. But I also know that we have a responsibility here in Michigan. 1 out of 100,000 white folks are impacted by gun violence. That number increases 28 times when it comes to African Americans here in the state of Michigan. So we have a lot of work to do in addressing this issue. And the unfortunate reality is far too many of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle have not taken a serious approach. And everyone saw Oxford High School, a shooting just 50 minutes from Detroit that shook the state of Michigan, but did not shake the state legislature to act. In this situation, you had a father and a mother who purchased a weapon and did not safely store that weapon. They put it in a dresser, and that son took that weapon to school in his backpack and ended up murdering 4 of his classmates, injuring over 7. So we are asking for basic legislation, something that says that if you have a weapon, you are liable for storing it properly. And if you don't store it properly, then you are liable for potential felony charges if it results in the death or injury of other people. Common sense legislation that simply says we want gun owners in the United States to be responsible. We want them to have the right to be able to have firearms, but in doing so, recognize that it is a huge responsibility to ensure that those around you are protected. And that's really where the conversation has to go. But we have seen people sit on this issue time and time again. You thought after Sandy Hook when literal 6 and 7-year-old children were massacred that we would see action. We did not. We saw after the Pulse nightclub where people were murdered going out and enjoying time with their friends. Nothing happened. We saw Parkland. We saw Columbine. We see Oxford here in Michigan. How much longer and how many more people have to die in the United States from this crisis before we recognize there has to be a change? You know, part of the responsibility of government and lawmaking is we identify problems and hope to legislate solutions so that people are safer, people have the constitutional right to live free and with the ability to have life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So that's some of the legislation that we've worked on here in the state of Michigan. And we are continuously waiting. One of the things that I'm working on right now personally is legislation that suggests, and I'm hoping my Republican colleagues will entertain this idea, that if a child in a classroom has a history of mental health issues or concerns like we had with Ethan Crumbly, who murdered his classmates, that the school, that the parents, should they own a firearm or the guardian, they must disclose to the school that there's a excuse me, that there is a firearm in the house, just to make sure that the school keeps a watchful eye on that particular student so that they're not sneaking a weapon in and potentially performing heinous acts of violence. So hoping that we can get some traction on that and begin the conversation of finally addressing this long disease in America that has murdered so many people because of government's inability to act. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ibrahim. I also have a follow-up question on this. You know, we're talking about this problem that, you know, we're seeing the consequences and they're very tragic. And you're right. I mean, the legislative haven't been able to, you know, to do anything, you know, powerful to address this problem. And so, in your opinion, what are the challenges? What are the barriers that are preventing legislative bodies from enacting stricter, you know, gun control laws?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think courage is a huge component, right? People are afraid of the NRA. People are afraid of folks who try to use the Second Amendment as an excuse to be passive in continuous acts of violence that we see time and time again. And like I said from the onset, no one is trying to prohibit the ability of Americans to have weapons for their protection or to be able to use them in sport and game and things like hunting, which is very, very important for so many Michiganders here in Michigan. But that doesn't change the reality that there is a crisis. You know, if I'll use an example, semi-trucks currently have a steel bar at the very bottom of the truck behind the trailer. That was installed because we saw in some accidents that vehicles would go underneath the actual semi-truck trailer and they would die. The steel bar that was placed at the very end, if you ever drive down a freeway, you'll see this. Every single truck, semi-truck in America, on the trailer, there's a steel bar at the bottom. And that is to prevent vehicles from sliding underneath and potentially murdering someone and getting crushed by the underside of a vehicle. When we saw that people were dying from poisoned aspirin and Tylenol bottles, ibuprofen, we added a safety seal to pharmaceutical drugs to ensure that when someone was buying prescription drugs or over-the-counter medication, they knew that it was safe and it was not tampered with, so they were not dying from people who were lacing some of these drugs. So there is absolutely a way for us to address these issues. But you have organizations like the NRA and certain organizations that hide under the guise of protecting the Constitution when they don't. How can you protect someone's right to bear arms when you don't protect someone's right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? We need to recognize that we can do both things at the same time, but we have to have the political courage. So the short answer here is there is an incredible lobby, and I say incredible not in a positive way, incredible in a grandiose way, that have held my colleagues on the other side of the aisle by the neck, enforcing them to not act and continue to ignore these issues. We see this in Congress. You know, I really thought after Sandy Hook, when over 20 literal preschool children were murdered, I'm talking about multiple bullets in their bodies. Like, imagine a 6-year-old child going to school, and imagine the amount of trauma these families face by seeing all of these children die. And the ones that survived, imagine the trauma that they live with now. You would think after that moment in American history that we would have seen action. We did not. And it's because of the cowardice of some of our colleagues and some of our elected officials who failed to recognize the need to act in this moment. And it's unfortunate, but my hope and what makes me confident is a majority of Americans, a vast majority of Americans, believe that we need to have responsible gun legislation that holds gun owners responsible for the weapons that they have in their homes, that limit the type of weapons that can be purchased that are not necessary. Weapons of war do not belong in people's homes, for example, and that ensure that those who can purchase firearms have done the extensive background checks to ensure that we don't have situations like we saw in Dearborn, where somebody walked into a gun shop, purchased a weapon, and killed himself in the parking lot of the actual gun shop. And I'll close with a personal story. You know, last year in March, it was you know, we're heading into the 1-year anniversary. Just 4 houses away from me, I had 4 young men playing basketball who one was killed in a drive-by shooting. They just graduated high school. They were playing basketball in one of the driveways, and someone drove by and fired over 40 rounds of bullets on those 4 young men. And one of them got a full ride scholarship to play basketball in college, just graduated high school, literally walked the stage a couple weeks prior to that moment. That young man was shot in the foot. The other one was injured as well, and the third one unfortunately passed away. But that young man who lost his life, you know, our condolences to his family. But think about the young man who got a full ride scholarship to go play basketball and an opportunity to move towards that American dream everybody talks about. He lost that opportunity, or may have lost the opportunity, because of senseless gun violence. So these are the people that we have to think about every single time we talk about legislating to protect people here in Michigan and across the United States.
Thank you so much, Ibrahim. This is absolutely true. I mean, it's these kind of stories and others that should force people to think about the gravity of gun violence and to, you know, force the government to do something about it. Moving to you, Adil, you know, as we heard from both Debbie and Ibrahim, unfortunately, schools are not shielded from the, you know, the impacts of gun violence. And, you know, with all of the mass shootings incidents, or like the suicides that we hear about in schools. And so, you know, as a public school board member, can you go briefly over, you know, what gun violence in American schools look like today, and how can schools, with the help of the public school boards, how can they, you know, keep the education environment safe for students and staff alike?
Sure. Well, Hadil, thank you as well for having me with you and with your esteemed guests. It's a hard act to follow, Dr. Debbie and Ibrahim, but I'll try. One thing that I want to mention in the beginning is something that really keeps me up at night as a school board member is a shooting at one of our schools. And to see what happened at Oxford and before that Parkland and other high schools and elementary schools, where somebody would walk in with an AK-47 or with a automatic or semi-automatic weapon and just start firing weapons or start firing bullets at defenseless employees or staff and students. is a horrific act. I mean, we can look at the Middle East, we could look at other countries in the world where they do have wars happening right now. But I have not come across a case, maybe it has happened, but I've not came across a case where even in a country where it's embattled in a war situation, where somebody would just walking into a school and start shooting kids. That is something that is so unfortunately unique to the United States. I do agree with Representative Ayash of saying that it is a unique US problem that we do have the Second Amendment. We are the first country in the world that its citizens bear arms. Per capita, Yemen unfortunately comes number 2. And we do kind of see the remnants right now of bearing arms by citizens. Unfortunately, it's you're allowing folks, those who are sane and those who are not, to bear arms. And you cannot really, it's the same way in driving, as he mentioned, you cannot make sure that everybody gets a driver's license without driving school and without being checked for their cognitive skills if they're able to drive safely a vehicle, not alone given a semi-automatic weapon or even a gun. So currently, unfortunately, and it's the sad reality that we have to live with, the laws, gun laws in this country are not obviously are terrible as to describe it at best. Anybody can, it's so easy to purchase a weapon, and it's so easy to use it in the wrong hands and use it in the wrong ways, and it could get definitely to the wrong hands. And this is what we're seeing right now. And the absence of not just law enforcement, but the absence of community work that Dr. Debbie Muntasir is talking about is what is getting us to the situation. Most of the time, you know, these shootings happen as a misunderstanding. I remember back in 2005, I lost my best friend to gun violence in New York City. He left Michigan to work in a deli in New York, and he was already married. He had a daughter, and for a 75 cents, somebody wanted to steal something from the place. He warned them of that, and he told them not to. And the predator told him, you know, I'm going to come back and shoot you the next day. Now, my friend Yasser kind of shrugged it off, and he didn't think that he was serious, but the guy was. He came the next day and shot him. So right now, anybody can get in a gun. So what can we do as school communities? You were asking me, what can we do, school board members? I know when the Oxford situation happened, a lot of folks will be like, although we need those metal detectors, we need all of the technology that we need in the school, and you know, all of the things, that preventive measures that would seem that they would help us in the situation. But those are all kind of reactive measures if the situation happens, in which we actually need to look into the ones that actually make sense. Now, while metal detectors don't really, studies have shown they have added nothing. In fact, they actually have increased gun violence. Other technologies could definitely help, like, for example, detecting if there's a weapon, or cameras would definitely help. But those are reactive measures. Those are the things that we can do to do what would we do if it happens. But we have to ask ourselves, how can we prevent this even from happening altogether? How can we make sure that, you know, some even have suggested we arm teachers. Well, teachers go to school to teach. They don't come to carry a weapon and be in a combat mode. That's another extreme that folks want to go just for the sake of bearing arms. Now, as Representative Ayash, I am also, you know, somebody who used to carry arms in Yemen, and I go around and we do it for fun, for entertainment. However, when it comes to carrying it and owning it, I think there has to be a process. The legislative has to do its job. And that's why we're asking them to enact these common sense laws that say, for example, in this Oxford instance, there is no law in the state of Michigan Constitution or the state of Michigan laws that prevent or that will penalize you or make you liable if you leave your weapons out, out of storage at the house and minors can get access to it. I was blown away that this is not even illegal. So they were saying this is definitely still legal in Michigan. You could have your weapons laid out anywhere in the house. And obviously as minors, there were so many incidents where minors would get their hands on those guns, they start playing with them, and then sometimes they shoot themselves, they shoot the people around them. The other thing is, as far as the school community, yeah, we do need to do that education. We need to do, communities also need to do the education of reaching out and understanding, what are the current issues so we don't have these misunderstandings. However, we have to be realistic about things. So for example, I'm going to jump a little bit here onto, the bodegas or the delis or the gas stations where, many of our immigrant population is starting to owning and operating, but they are in very dangerous places and very hazardous communities where guns are out there and they recognize that risk. And unfortunately, they do very little as far as protecting their workers or protecting the people or protecting themselves. So that needs to happen. That front needs to happen. But the major issue is to resolve this is, why would you be there? Why would you put yourself to be there in the first place? If the government failed to do its job in these communities, you're not the government. You're not going to go there and take the government's role of making sure that, your arms are not at the streets and weapons are not at the street. Unfortunately, we have to work with what we have, but you can definitely, as a business owner, decide where you want to go and have business, and you want to make sure that you pick the safest place, or you don't try to go for the, we always think about it as a dollar figure. Oh, I could make more money here in this community, but you have to outweigh the risk of, you may lose your life, you may lose somebody else's life. And that's something that has to be really calculated. And I am truly sorry. And I'm always saddened to hear all the time when we hear about a shooting. It reminds me of my friends Yasser and those who have passed away in those senseless shootings. And my condolences go to their families. But again, as business owners, as folks who are in our community, we do really have to check ourselves as far as where do we want to do business. Sorry for taking so long, Hadi.
That's okay. I just maybe I wanted to bring us back a little bit to the to keeping schools safe. Are there any specific legislations that you would like to see that would, specifically address gun violence at schools, that would keep schools safe?
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. We want to look for this legislation, the one that Representative Ayesh was talking about. So one is first of all, you have to keep your weapons locked and secured. You cannot have them laid out everywhere, right? There has to be also an education piece to gun owners. There has to be also making sure that, when guns are purchased, they're being tracked, just like, cars are being tracked. Whenever a student exhibits a behavior that is troublesome, we also need to be able to ask those questions. As of right now, school system is even restricted as far as what questions that can they ask about, weapons at the house and things like that. So the legislature is highly needed in those aspects. We need to also, for special students who have mental health issues, we want to make sure that there are no, weapons at the house and that they don't get weapons in their hands, because, some of these students might not act in their full cognitive skills. Or they might not realize what they're doing. So those are many, many asks of the legislature, and we have a whole lot more, but we definitely also need money for making sure that our schools are secured from turnstiles. We unfortunately have to resort to our taxpayers to pay for these. So, for example, when you enter a school right now, any of our schools right now in Dearborn, you would have to be buzzed in. But we would like to even go a step further of you buzzed in and then you get entered into a location where you only have access to the main office, for example. And then in order to go to the main office, there's another way of getting you into the school. That way, if is a preventive measure, if an intruder comes in, they will not be able to get to a classroom, and that there is an opportunity for the staff to reach, police enforcement and so forth.
Yeah, thank you so much. Back to you, Dr. Zibby. So we know that the problem is really large and it impacts almost everyone here. But are there any particular communities in the U.S. that are more vulnerable to gun violence? And the other question is, do you see any opportunities for synergies, or like for all of these different communities to get together and advocate jointly to to end gun violence?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the largest number of gun violence incidents are happening in Black and Brown communities, right? Communities that have high crime rates as well. So it's unfortunate what we're seeing. We're seeing it across the board in different parts of the United States. If you look in California where it's happening, if you look in North Carolina where it's happening, you could see the same patterns. And so unfortunately, this is a pandemic that that we have to really figure out, how do we make sure people are safe. And as I said earlier, the people that are the largest number of people that are victims to gun violence are innocent people that are walking down the street or in their home watching TV and a stray bullet flies through their window, right? And it's because illegal guns are actually in our communities, and I'm talking about New York. The majority of the guns that are in New York are illegal. They are not with permits, and people who have permits, are very cautious, as to how they use them, I hope. But the point is this is really the biggest challenge for our community. And then the second part of your question, I'm sorry, what was it?
Yeah, so I was asking that, if there are specific communities that are more vulnerable to these incidents, then do you see any opportunities for them to come together and kind of, advocate jointly to end gun violence? Absolutely. Are there any? Yeah.
Absolutely. So right now, the Yemeni American Merchants Association is working with the 67th clergy precinct, the 70th precinct clergy community. So these are all, clergy who are ministers and leaders in different communities that are basically working collectively and together to work on this and to really, bring community together and find ways to resolve, to find ways to, bring some type of peace and understanding amongst people. And, I want to say one thing, that Adil was talking about, that perhaps people could find other places to work where their lives are not in danger. I wish that were the case, but there's one thing about the Yemeni community that I love and I so admire, is that they're courageous. They will take on jobs that nobody wants. They will put their life on the line to provide a service. We had the worst experience with the pandemic, the coronavirus pandemic, and our bodegas, our corner stores were the lifeline of New York City. They fed the people. They took care of the people when our trains were down, when we had limited bus service, when people were too afraid to go far distance to get groceries. They were the lifeline. They were the essential workers, who really were there and who supported so many communities. And it's unfortunate that what we're seeing now with the uptick of violence happening, that they're at the end of it. But, we are optimistic. We're optimistic that we're going to be working with the new mayor and legislators, to make sure that our small business owners are safe and secure, and that they're able to, continue providing, the excellent services that they're offering communities.
Yeah, thank you so much. And perhaps my last question before I open the floor to audience questions is to Ibrahim. We heard Dr. Zubi at the beginning, asking people to go vote. And so in your opinion, to what extent do you think the Yemeni American community is active politically? And what do you think is needed? Like, what is your message to people from the American Yemeni community to, how can they be more active, and how can they have a louder voice?
Yeah. So the Yemeni American community will be sufficiently active when 100% of our community engages in the political process. Until then, we have a lot more work to do, and not to discount the efforts that our community has done and continues to do in organizing. I mean, obviously, the work that Yama has done in New York is a clear example of that, and the increasingly growing political power in Dearborn, in Hamtramck, in Metro Detroit is clearly an important thing for us as well. What can we do, particularly around responsible gun ownership and ensuring that the voices are heard and are at the table? I think number one, engage in local government. I think this is where you start, and this is the bedrock of all political foundations and all political power that is built. Yes, it is great to take a photo with a member of Congress or a US senator or the president or the governor, but if you're not familiar with who your local school board is, if you're unsure who your local city council members are, that's a problem, because most police conduct and issues regarding public safety happen at the local level. It is your municipal government, it is your county government that deals with these issues. So ensuring that we are engaging with our county governments, with our borough governments, with our city governments, that is going to be the huge step in making that possible. So the question is how? All right, Ibrahim, you're telling us engage. What does that mean exactly? Police precincts have meetings. Whether you live in Oakland, California, Detroit, Michigan, or New York City, it is important to go to these police precinct meetings all the time and consistently, so that the concerns of your community are heard. Because the reality is, in the United States, in participatory democracy, if you are not participating in the process, you are likely going to be overlooked or ignored through that process. So it is important to always be at the table and give a little bit of your time to ensure that you are at the table and that the conversations that are being had are impacting your community first and foremost. The final thing I'll say is this. I would love to see more folks just get on advisory councils and community boards to stay engaged politically. I know one of my first things that I've done was I joined the Recycling Commission here in Hamtramck, which led me, it was a voluntary position that I signed up for, but it allowed me to engage in the process. I know Adil, before he joined the school board, was a PTA member, was just an involved parent who was concerned about Dearborn schools. So this is really how you begin to penetrate and get involved in the system so that your voices are heard. I know I've seen the conversations that have been had with the Yemeni community in New York. We voted for these people. They promised us this. They voted against our interests, so on and so forth. Well, the question I have is, elections are not the end game for engaging in politics. It is simply the punctuation mark. It is the period at the end of a sentence. It's part of a broader story for our community to build power. So really recognizing that in the same way that we, anybody who goes to the gym or wants to invest in their own health, you can't just do it one day. You can't eat broccoli for one day and avoid seed and think you'll be healthy, right? It's something that you got to do on a consistent basis so that you can see some of the impacts. And that's really what we have to recognize. It has to be a consistent effort. We have to be organized. Dividing up into factions as a community does not help. The reality is the Yemeni community is still small. We are still a minority community wherever we are. But our power is most important and most valued when we are coming together as one unified voice. To quote my friend Jamil Tahiri, you know, our power is in our unity, قوتنا في وحدتنا, and that's the thing that we have to recognize and remember.
Thank you so much. So now we are opening the floor for audience questions. So anyone, if you have any questions, please write them in the chat box. And we do have some questions from anonymous people. So the first is, and anyone of you can answer, does good guys with guns actually make a community safer?
You know, studies have shown that more weapons in the community does not necessarily make a community safer. I know some of the conversations, particularly New York, for example, is every single store owner has to have a gun. Well, you know, this is not 1600s or the 1700s, and it's not the wild, wild west, right? You're not going to have a bunch of shootouts every time there's a dispute, because the reality is if you're not injuring someone else, you're injuring yourself or the property that you are around. So do people have the right to have a weapon if they believe it makes them safe? Absolutely. My nephews own guns. My father owns a gun. My brothers own guns. You know, that is within your right. The question is, has my father ever used the gun to protect himself in the event of violence? No. Do I hope that he ever has to use that weapon? Absolutely not. So it's really a personal decision. But what we got to remember is good guys with guns. You know, everyone thinks they're a good guy. If I'm going in to rob a store, I'm probably doing it to feed my family. If anyone ever read John Q or watched the movie John Q, you know, there's a man who held the hospital hostage so he can get his son a liver transplant, right? I'm sure what he thought he was doing was good. He was a good guy. But committing crimes does not necessarily lead to that. And to be clear, self-defense is not a crime. If you are in a situation where, you know, la samahallah, you are in that situation, you know, I hope people's judgment will be best interpreted in that moment. That's reasonable. But more weapons does not make a community safer. Studies have shown that time and time again. And it's something that folks like to use to increase gun ownership.
Yeah, and I'd like to add, because that question has been brought forward multiple times, why don't you just arm teachers who would like to be armed? And you know, at face value, that may sound like a good idea. However, it's very dangerous to even let any weapons inside the schools, and that's why you know, the legislation actually has helped us in this aspect, where we're actually barring anybody from carrying weapons. So Michigan is an open carry state, and you can literally walk into any place, with the exception of houses, I think, of worship. Correct me if I'm wrong, Representative.
Right.
And you know, I think if you guys recall, some people with weapons walked into the Michigan House of Representatives with semi-automatic weapons.
Yeah,
and it was their right at the time, right?
It still is their right. So today, you can come to where I work with an AR-15. You cannot walk in with a sign that says, fund our public schools, or protect our planet, or protect or stop the war in Yemen. That is illegal. Any sign is illegal. But you can bring in a
walk
weapon
in with the AR-15. So it's mind-boggling to just hear that. So yeah, definitely we were though it is in the state statute right now that, you know, schools can actually enact laws to say that weapons are not allowed on school grounds, and that is a good thing. As far as, you know, good teachers, I mean, you know, we're very lucky in Dearborn that we have some of the amazing teachers in the state. So, and they are good guys, but do we arm them? Then you may have to put in the risk of, what if the weapons, you know, get into the wrong hands? What if the students get into those weapons? What happens if there's an argument? How do you know that the teacher is armed or not? It's so many, you get into the ifs and nots and so many things just to say, oh, let's everybody can run loose with weapons. So we don't want even that conversation or even the thought of a parent who sends their kids to school to think, oh, is my student going to be in a shooting combat today? So, and that's why after the Oxford shooting, we had a lot of students, unfortunately, do this. They would try to do pranks, and they would send in pranks, and some have been from outside our district and some from within, where they say, there might be a shooting at school tomorrow. So our schools take every threat seriously. Our superintendent has made that clear. The board president has made that clear, that whether this is a prank or not, we're going to take it every seriously. We're going to get, involve the police. These are the lives of our students, of our staff. We cannot take any chance and say, oh, this might be a prank, or, let's just ignore it. So unfortunately, some have gotten into trouble. Some have, taken it as definitely a life lesson to make sure that you use social media responsibly, that you do not try to say, if you want a day off school tomorrow, you don't just send a threat saying there will be a shooting at the school, and you get everybody riled up and the superintendent up until 2 a.m., talking to the police about this possible threat, because we don't know if it was a student or if it was a real threat. So this, unfortunately, was a trend in not only in our district, but in many. And some districts actually have closed school because they were so scared. And we were at that point, whether we considered the threat, and but fortunately our police force were able to track, the person who made that threat. And it turned out to be that they were trying, to make it as a prank or as a joke. And that I tell that to the parents all the time, we should be talking to our kids about these conversations, that, you cannot make that threat. We live now in a, I don't want to go to the length of saying PTSD society of thinking about, if there is a threat in my son's school, but, Oxford is still fresh in our minds. And if we're saying, there's a threat, definitely parents will withhold their children from coming to school. So I just ask that, parents definitely talk to their kids about being responsible, and also to say something if you see something. If something has taught us from the Oxford situation, that there's so many red flags that were there that were unfortunately missed. Especially that even the gun owner, in one report that I read, the gun owner who sold this gun to this family, the kid was there and the parents were actually literally showing him how to use the gun, and he's a minor. So there, and then there was that teacher who raised those flags about the drawings and about the mental health state of the student. And unfortunately, the school district, at the time, did not take those threats serious, or they did, but it wasn't to the extent of making sure that situation is addressed. So it tells us, we as board members, as public officials, we learned a lot, and that's why we take every single threat seriously.
Yeah, thank you so much. There is actually another similar questions. It says, what would you say to people that claim that gun violence is, it's just a means to end, violence? So if guns were to be outlawed tomorrow, wouldn't people just, use knives or, baseball bats to instead of guns? So should the root causes of violence be addressed instead of just, banning guns?
Well, I can speak as a legislator. We're not trying to ban all guns. I don't support that. We can walk and chew bubblegum at the same time, right? Are there issues that we have to address regarding what leads to violence? Absolutely. Is there a problem with how we distribute guns in the United States? Absolutely. Both can be resolved One of them is more simple, right? Not a crazy idea. If you have a history of abusing your children, your wife, your girlfriend, your boyfriend, whatever the case may be, you shouldn't be able to buy a weapon. If you are someone who has a history of mental health issues or have tried to inflict self-harm, you should not be able to have a weapon. Right? There are common sense things that we could do right now, tomorrow, yesterday, that can save thousands of lives. We can still address the long-term issues of violence, but those are two separate issues that both can be resolved. One of them, there's a lack of action and there's clear solutions. The other one requires a long-term discussion.
All right. There's another question about if there are any examples of current state laws that reduced gun crime rates. And I think it is similar to another question. What measures are put in place to keep guns out of the hands of the bad people?
Well, I can answer the second question, and then Representative can go with the first one. As far as other states, I don't know if we can model other states that have less crimes. Obviously, every state, I believe, it has its own unique challenges and unique situations, and we cannot really compare, state to another. However, we do want to look at common sense laws in some states where they bar weapons from entering some places. I don't know if any states have started banning AR-15s or automatic weapons. I don't think that has been even introduced in any legislation. They may have been introduced, but has not passed and became law at the state. And remember, this is a Second Amendment. So sometimes, state laws can go so far, and you have to actually change things at the federal level even, because the right to bear arms is entrenched in the Constitution. And that was in 1770s. The Bill of Rights was at the time when the Constitution was passed. It was folks were just coming out of the Revolutionary War. They had a lot of weapons, as customary, like Yemen right now. You could go to a house and you could find all kinds of weapons, that you do not need in a household, for sure. This is totally for the army. It's not even for the police, doesn't even use these weapons. So as far as the second question, you were saying if there were, what can we do? What measures can we do so it doesn't fall into the bad hands? Is that what was that?
Are there any current laws that keep guns from the hands of bad people?
So I mean, the first one to begin with, this is so common sense. As for example, it would be to make it a crime if you have your weapons not secure. I still can't wrap my head around this, that this is still legal in the Michigan, or this is not illegal in the Michigan law. And I hope, our legislatures and Representative Ayash and others can convince our other legislatures. I know he's on board, but unfortunately, the majority of the legislature is Republican, and they're definitely adamant about this situation. However, I do believe that there are some moderates where you can actually work with them to do these legislation, for example, to track the sale of weapons. I still can't fathom the fact that we're not doing that as a nation.
I can chime in what we're doing in New York. What we're seeing is we have elected officials and nonprofit organizations, as well as faith-based groups, that are actually doing buyback guns. So what does that mean? It's basically identifying, actually raising money, and then having people come in with no issues of being persecuted or what have you, to just give a gun and get money. So they're giving like $250 for a gun. And it's proven to be really effective, because there are a lot of people who are just coming in and saying, I got this gun, I heard you're doing this, here's a gun. So there's been, a number of these are done, at least a couple of times a year. Here in New York City, they've proven to be effective. And I think this is, a positive way to actually be able to do that. And, one of the things that's really important, to know, like in New York, sadly, a lot of these guns are getting into the hands of minors, underage children under the age of 18, right? So, between the ages of 13 and 16, that you're finding some of these youth actually carrying guns. So I think that there has to be an opportunity to find, creative ways of doing this, engaging communities to get guns off the streets.
So there's a comment that, they think it's a good way for criminals to get rid of murder weapons. Is there a way to ensure that, this is not happening? Did you hear the question? Did you hear the comment? So it was written in the chat. They said that that's a good way for criminals to get rid of murder weapons, to just, to hand in their guns and get money for it.
Mm-hmm. Oh, so I'm reading it that this is a creative, good way to do it, right?
But again,
So,
if you don't have laws that, really control the flow of weapons and track it, it doesn't matter how much you can collect weapons from, supposedly the streets. It will find another way of getting into the wrong hands. So we have to first put in the laws of restricting access and making sure that anybody who gets a weapon is tracked. That right now, unfortunately, as Representative Ayaz said, I could walk to Walmart, just present my ID and get the weapon. I'm done, right? And I could give this weapon to anybody, essentially. So it will take a long time to just track this weapon and where it went. We need to do best of that. I need to have a license. I need to have a registration for this weapon, for this piece of weapon. And going back to the original question, people could literally buy knives and start stabbing people. Well, you could essentially, but how long does it take you to stab so many people, and how long does it take you to just shoot heads? And the impact would be a lot more when you're especially having a semi-automatic weapon that you can shoot 5 people in less than 3 seconds. So it is not fair to compare that, but at the same time, there has to be common sense laws. And I think that's, on the side of the government, but we actually need to have the conversation of how can we, I think going back to the main question, as community members, try to minimize these kind of incidents and my approach to it is multi-layered, long-term, short-term, but I think we still need to look for ways of getting folks educated, going to colleges, receiving, high-paid jobs that are safe, that you don't have to work in an area where it's dangerous and you're putting yourself on the line. You're not a police officer. You're making $10, $15 an hour, be it, but it's not worth it to put your life on the line, and it's not worth it to lose your life and have your family, regret that minute that they put you in that position, or you put yourself into that position. Go ahead, Representative. Sorry for interrupting.
No, I just want to flag this. So the reality is ammo is not registered, or you can't track it. So this idea that all weapons are registered through an FFL doesn't actually address the problem where we have a clear example of far too many weapons in the United States that lead to far too many deaths. And this is, again, a uniquely American issue. And on the issue of, do we expect gun violence to end? The hope is yes. The reality is you will still find gun violence happening. We have a speed limit so people don't drive recklessly, right? Does that prevent people from driving recklessly? Or do we still find people that drive 80, 90, 100 miles an hour? Yes, the unfortunate reality is people still do that. the question we have to ask ourselves is, where we have a government that is supposed to react and legislate to ensure the general welfare for a community, we see a clear problem. No other place in the world do you have an issue where more people die from gun violence than any other country in the world, particularly at the hands of mass shootings. So this is clearly a problem that we need to have. And more often than not, these mass shootings happen at the hands of people who should not have had a weapon to begin with. Can this problem be addressed? Yes, it absolutely can. Have we addressed it on any government, state or federal? No, we have not. Is this a failure on the acts of public officials and elected officials? Yes. These are all facts. This is not a matter of opinion. This is a fact. More Americans die from mass shootings than any other person, any other demographic in the world. So there's something that we have to address. And like I said, we were able to put seals on Tylenol bottles because there was a concern. We put steel bars at the bottom of semi-truck trailers to prevent cars from going underneath. We put seatbelts in cars, and we've put standards for children's seats and baby seats in cars to protect people. Why can't we do something to protect folks from senseless gun violence where we can?
Thank you so much, all of you. So unless our speakers want to add any last note, I think we've reached the end of our discussion, and there are no more audience questions.
I want to add one thing. I think that, this is not just an issue that is affecting the Yemeni American community, but Americans all over, right? And so I think when we work in coalitions, when we partner with other communities, that makes us stronger. And that really shows that we care about the communities that we live in. So if there is anything that people should walk away with from this gathering, is understanding that it takes a village, right? And we are a part of that village to make our children, our small businesses, and everybody safe and secure. And if we work together, we're able to address a lot of the issues that are impacting our safety.
Yeah,
Thank you.
the last thing that I want to add, Hadil, and to what Dr. Debbie said, is also study your own community. And before you embark on a business, definitely study the area, weigh the risks, and way to mitigate those risks. I see so many folks who are very ambitious about making a living, and they don't weigh these options. And those options need to be weighed. If something is a lucrative business idea, please consider the safety situation and what can you do to mitigate those safety situations. I've seen some, for example, a gas station cashiers or attendants where they're not really trained on how to handle unruly customers, and when they're not trained to do that, they tend to leave their secured area and try to engage, and then only terrible things end up happening where they lose their lives or they get injured. And it's not worth it. It's definitely not worth it to engage in these kind of situations, in these kind of dangerous areas, if you are there to begin with. Again, I would hope that, folks would definitely look into how could I improve on myself. I always say this, it's not a shame to work. Actually, a shame is you sit home and you're capable of working and you don't work. That's what's shame. So you work at any job, whether it's at a gas station or a deli or anything, it's no shame. That's actually, you should take pride in that. However, what is shameful also is you stay in that position for your whole life. You don't try to improve on what can I do next? And you don't say, this is only for this period of time. But again, make sure that you take the right decision for yourself and for your family. And if you absolutely are under, no option but to work in these environments, is to take your, precautions, to make sure that you are in a very secured area, that you do not engage outside your area. And I've seen it multiple times over and over again where people just ignore the safety precautions that have been told to them by their employer, and that's where things go wrong. So I wish everybody, again, I send my condolences to those who have lost folks due to senseless gun violence. And I wish that, working with our legislatures, working with our communities, and working with our community members, that we can get to a solution where we can minimize these incidents from happening. We're never going to say we're going to have a 100% no violence. That's kind of dreaming of being too dreaming of utopia. But definitely we want to make sure that, because of how often now they appear and how often they happen, that we protect ourselves and that we take precautions to making sure that those don't happen as often as they do. And I once again thank the American Center for Justice and my colleagues here, Dr. Muntasir and Representative Ayyash, for being with me, and also you, Hadil. I hope this was helpful. I know some people may disagree with us on our viewpoints. Feel free to reach out and we can talk further. But I wish everybody, inshallah, safe workplaces, and always invest in yourself to do better and to reach higher levels in your professional and personal life.
Well, I think we have reached the end of our discussion today. Thank you again, Dr. Debbie Al-Muntasir and Mr. Adil Mazeb and Representative Ibrahim Ayyash, who had to leave early. And thank you for our audience for the thoughtful questions, and for the American Center for Justice for organizing this panel discussion on such an important issue. All right, I wish everyone a good afternoon or a good evening, whatever you are, and take care.
All right, Assalamu alaikum, everyone.